I appreciate that introduction. I'm actually someone that needs an introduction, unlike Gertz and others who are speaking today. So yes, 24 years on Wall Street, started with 6 at Sullivan and Cromwell, and then 16 at large investment banks, and for the past several months I've been starting my own. It's actually called Advection Growth Capital, which you can see there, and what the name means, there is a meaning to the word. It means that molecules of a liquid or gas tend to adhere to each other as they move through another liquid or gas or the environment. And who knows the most famous example of advection in the world, probably? The fog coming in through the Golden Gate and over the Coast Range Mountains in San Francisco. So I'm a 5th generation Sacramentan. I spent 8 years in the Bay Area, 4 at Stanford University, 1 working in San Francisco, then 3 at Stanford Law School. So that fog was kind of always around me. Even though I live in New York City, I wanted a name that kind of harkened back to my California roots. And I think advection is a good term to describe high quality growth capital. In other words, it should stay together, and the idea being, like, put capital in, I bring my advisory services along with it to support. So that's where the name comes from, Wayne. So you got your explanation there. Thank you. So why am I here to talk about space? Well, for 56 days, from inauguration until March 17th, I held this business card. Senior financial advisor to NASA as a part of the presidential appointments team. So what I'm going to talk about today, how I found myself at NASA, what I did, what I learned that I think is important to this conference, and then we'll have time for some Q&A. So, how I found myself at NASA. There are a lot of stories, lots of links. I'm going to give you the quick one here. So he got elected, President Trump. We both live in New York City. It's a big place. I didn't know him. I didn't work on the campaign. But I knew this guy. Wait, there's 2 guys in that picture. The guy on the right, I think everybody in this room probably recognizes. But Elon had absolutely nothing to do with me being at NASA. That's a good, successful investment banker. My phone's ringing. Hopefully someone that wants to buy some stock. Okay, so Elon had nothing to do with having me be at NASA. Who knows who the guy on the left is? Well, Ewan, you don't count here. Ewan's got the teacher's edition. I just want to introduce Ewan Foster here. He's with Northcourt Global, 2 years out of Harvard. He wants to get into the space industry. If anybody is hiring, one of the smartest guys I've ever met. And like Bill Gertzenmeyer said, he wants to put his talents to use in the space industry. So does anybody else know who the guy on the left is? Nobody? Peter Teal, you got it. So Peter Teal is a friend. He was a year behind me at Stanford undergrad. He was my classmate at Stanford Law School. We started the same law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, and I was his investment banker when he sold PayPal to eBay in 2002. So Peter worked on the Trump campaign and then was in charge of, during the transition, finding people to staff the science and technology related agencies. NASA was among those, and I learned through that NASA needed somebody that didn't know anything about space, but knew something about numbers and accounting and finance. So oh, thank you, some water. So I said, well, this is an interesting opportunity. Should I accept it? This guy, Max Steyer, the CEO of the Partnership for Public Service, another law school classmate, he convinced me to take the job. He's going to come up again later. This was another reason why I wanted to come. I kind of like this picture for a number of reasons. So Congress, of course, stayed red. I thought that was an opportunity to get more done, having Congress and the presidency the same party. I also think that for political strategists and hat makers out there, this is a good lesson. You shouldn't use the other guy's slogan as a part of your hat. That didn't work out so well. So the other reason was my parents. This is a picture of us in 1984 when I was 18 years old. And this is what they look like now. And to come full circle, you might recognize that. That's President Reagan, Chief Justice Rehnquist, and my mom applauding my dad, Anthony Kennedy, when he was sworn in as a Supreme Court justice. So why did that have an influence? Well, a couple reasons. 41 years, my dad's been a federal judge serving our country. My mom was a public school teacher. So when I got an opportunity to serve after a long Wall Street career and I was starting my own business, I really didn't have anything going yet at that point. I said, I think that's a good idea. And besides, I had free room and board with my parents, and how often you get an opportunity to carpool with an 80-year-old who still works full time. So that was kind of fun. Now, this is why I only stayed 56 days. This is my family back in New York. And we do have a little black toy poodle there behind my son. My wife's holding him. You can't really see him in a black and white picture, but so that brought me back. So here is another swearing in. This is our presidential appointments team on Inauguration Day. And we went there for the first day, took the oath, and then we realized it was a holiday, nobody was there. So we said, well, what are we going to do? We kind of wandered around, we moved into some offices, and then everybody left. I actually took the train back to New York. Everybody else went out to the balls that night. And the real work started on Monday. By the way, this is my last day. This is the White House St. Patrick's Day party on March 17th. You can see the green dress in the background, and Spicy and I are wearing green ties. So that was my short stint at NASA. Now, what was a little scary about it is that all these people actually knew a lot about space. I was the one that didn't. And so I was a little bit concerned about this, I have to say. So on the first Monday, which was really the first real day of work, this guy, acting administrator Robert Lightfoot, convened a meeting. And I just want to pause for a moment to say that my father's given me a real sense of what a great public servant is. Dedicated to serving the country, getting the right answer, getting the mission done. And there's no one that upholds that ethos more than Robert Lightfoot. And frankly, Gertz and Steve Jerzyk and all the people I met at NASA is just really an incredible group to be a part of. So on that first day, many people gathered. Many more were video conferenced in from all the NASA centers around the country into a big room, the purpose being to introduce the presidential appointments team, give us a foundation of how we were going to all work together. Now, it wasn't this room, but this evokes a sense of the image. And I want you to know NASA is very good at communications. So visible sigh of relief, they are actually very good at that. So it was a room like this with monitors and people talking, and probably 80 people, maybe 100 if you include everybody that was teleconferenced in. And so everybody started going around talking about why they were there and what they knew about space. And if you go through this group, Shanna Dale, Rod Leesfeld, Greg Autry, Eric Noble, Jeff Waxton, Brandon Eden, every one of them had a significant background in the space industry. Many had worked at NASA. Shanna Dale had been a deputy administrator. The one person that hadn't was Jen Ray Wang, who's there on the left. And she was a communications specialist, worked for the Trump campaign, is now the head of communications at NASA. And I was at least relieved that she didn't have a real space background. And then when she was introducing herself, she said, well, yeah, I'm in communications, but I'm a space nut. I've got two kids. One is named Gemini, and the other is named Orion. And they're not named after the constellation or the zodiac sign. They're named after the NASA programs. And there was a wisecracker in the audience who chimed up and said, we're going to have to name your next kid SLS. And that got a big laugh. So it gets worse. So even Jen Ray had some kind of NASA story. Now, luckily, I was the last one to talk. And so I was sitting there, and I started doing a mantra saying, look, this is your environment. You've been in boardrooms all your life. You know how to deal with this situation. And I wish I had had Gertz whisper in my ear, it's okay that you don't have a space background. We need your help. Because I was a little nervous. So I started with an icebreaker. I said, look, I'm Greg Kennedy. I'm delighted to meet you. I have 3 points I want to go over. And I have 3 points because I went to law school and they teach you you're supposed to have 3 points. And there was a little bit of laughter, just enough that the icebreaker worked. And then the general counsel chimed in, they do, that's right. So I was kind of off to it. So point one was my self-deprecating comment and the compliment. I said, I want to admit that I don't know much about NASA or the space industry, but I'm here because I have a law school classmate, Max Steyer, who runs an organization called the Partnership for Public Service. I showed you a picture of him earlier. And Max said this has been the best place to work in government for the last 5 years running. And I wanted to be a part of a team like that. Next, I went with an obvious statement, so general that it couldn't be wrong. So this is point two. I said, I'll be sitting in the office of the CFO as Senior Financial Advisor, so I'll be working with the team, putting together the budget so that it maps to administration policy. And people kind of nodded and said, okay, that makes sense. And then I felt compelled to have some kind of sense that I was going to actually add some value. So I took a bit of a risk. And I said, look, my background is a businessman, advising business people. I'm not sure exactly how this is going to turn out, but I want to look at NASA like a business and try to figure out how we can make it better. You know, I advise CEOs on how they can get their stock price up, help their shareholders. Let's think about the American taxpayer and their interests as our shareholders, and NASA as a company. How can we do a better job for them? I said, I don't know any of these answers, but you all do. You all worked here for decades, and what I'd like to know is what keeps you here late at night where you say this is dumb? What frustrates you because you can't get missions done? What would help you to do more for the American people? And I paused a little bit more, and I said, look, and I don't want to think about this as in the practical, you know, how to get things done. I want to think about these as unbounded ideas. Just whatever is the right idea, let's get it captured, and then later on we're going to figure out whether we can get it done. That's what I'd like to hear from you, and we'll put it in a presentation, we'll take it to the White House, and we'll try to get it done. And then I paused. There was a lot of head scratching. The rest of my team didn't really know about this project, so they were scratching their heads. And there was just silence. But I was smart enough to know not to jump in, break the silence, dig myself deeper, so I just waited, kind of smiled stupidly and watched. And then Lightfoot said, unbounded ideas. I like that. Okay, well, let's have the NASA folks introduce themselves. So that was it. That was the first meeting. And after that, Greg Autry and Eric Noble, who ran the team, came into my office and they said, well, what are you talking about? What are we doing on this Unbounded Ideas project? And I looked at them, I said, I really have no idea. And they looked at me like, well, why are you talking about it? And I said, look, this is a good way for us, representing the administration, to start to get to know the people here, what they think about the organization, and it'll be a good way to test how welcoming they are to us being here. You know, if our phones don't ring and we just hear crickets, we'll know something. If we start getting a lot of ideas and input, we're going to know we have a successful operation. So, on my last day, Robert Lightfoot presented me this plaque. Blowing it up, it says, with appreciation for your support to NASA as part of the presidential appointments team, your unbounded ideas and efforts fit perfectly within NASA's boundless mission. March 2017. Okay, so with that built up over, almost 15 minutes, hopefully kind of fun, why don't we talk a little bit about what some of these unbounded ideas were. So the process was we collected ideas, and by the way, the phone started ringing, people started coming by. We very quickly set up a working group of 20 people within NASA. There was a lot of excitement around this project. Now, I should say, underpinning this, the transition team, or what they called the landing team, had built all these very complicated and well thought out space policies, many of which were talked about by Bridenstine, were talked about by Vice President Pence in his first Space Council, were talked about in reference to that slide that Bill Gerstenmaier put up was part of the plan. But because we didn't have an administrator, because the Space Council hadn't been formed yet, we didn't really want to get out in front of it with policy recommendations. So we had to have something else to do. I mean, the taxpayers were paying us. So we spent a lot of time doing this. We collected ideas, we got a working group, we organized it, and then we made a deck and we went over and presented it to the White House. So what were these big ideas and how do they fit into raising money for space companies? The biggest one that we spent tons of time talking about was appropriations. Look, it's a fundamental axiom on Wall Street. If you've got a 30-year mortgage that Wells Fargo is making, they have to go out and find 30 years worth of funding for how they're going to fund that mortgage. If Occidental Petroleum is spending 20 years digging an offshore oil well, they need to line up financing that's going to last them 20 years to get the job done. They don't kind of start on the first year and then the second year they figure out how they're going to fund that year. NASA is the ultimate mismatch of funding from a Wall Street perspective. You know, we have long-term missions that get funded on annual appropriations. And the amount of time, I tried to interview people and casually get a sense of, you know, how much budget time mission delay was caused by this. And I think it's somewhere about 30, 40% of people having to bang these long-term missions, like the ones that Gertz talked about, you know, going out to 2030 and beyond, you know, into annual appropriations. So this is a difficult thing. The Space Council will be critical in doing this. We need to have some kind of broad consensus view, a stake in the ground about what the policy is going to be, and we need long-term funding to get it done. Why is that important to private capital? Well, think about somebody that's building a HAB company that wants to develop a system to, you know, go on the surface of the moon. If he's going out trying to raise money from private investors, the first thing they're going to ask him is, well, you know, how can you predict that you're going to be able to get this done? And if he says, well, I don't really know because next year the administration policy might change, and it's going to be very hard. But if he can say, look, the administration's put a stake in the ground. We're going to build a cislunar operation. You know, a lunar base is going to be part of that. I'm going to be able to capture that, and you know, then that guy is going to raise money. Because again, the very fundamental thing you got to remember, what an investor pays today for a stock is what he thinks the future performance of that company is going to be able to generate in the future. And if you can't predict the future, then you can't value a stock. And if you're the space industry and one of the big determiners of policy, whether it be the Space Council, NASA, working with the Hill, is always changing around, is a very difficult backdrop to raise financing. So the most important thing we can do to lower the cost of capital for the space industry is to have more predictability in long-term programs. And one of the most important ways to both make those programs more efficient and to give the markets more security is to have multi-year appropriations. And you're saying, has this ever done? It has been done. When the space shuttle Challenger blew up and we had to build a new space shuttle, Ronald Reagan went to Congress and said, this is a priority. We need a 3-year appropriation. We need to get this done. And Gertz and others will tell you that was one of the most efficient things that NASA ever did, rebuilding that second shuttle. And it's because they had that full appropriation up front. So there is precedent for it. Some of the precedent around the International Space Station is also important. Okay, procurement. Now, as we talk about NASA more and more being an enabler, they're going to be doing less and less equipment buying themselves. But you would be shocked to know as taxpayers that 95% of NASA's procurement decisions get challenged. They get challenged by the people that lose out in the process. And apparently there's a whole cottage industry of lawyers in Washington that they're like these plaintiffs' lawyers that file a lawsuit when a stock goes down. As soon as somebody loses a procurement decision, either the Department of Defense, NASA, whatever, they go and they file a lawsuit. All the work stops. You have to turn all your attention to justifying your decision. And what percent of those 95% of cases that get challenged do you think the challenger ends up prevailing? It's about 5%. Huge waste of time, huge waste of money. Got to be fixed. Now, getting the government more out of the procurement business, one good way to fix it. But to the extent the government is going to need to keep procuring to develop enabling technologies, this should be fixed. Real estate. I mentioned 7 years at Stanford. I heard a great quote at one of my first days at NASA. NASA is the second largest landowner in the Silicon Valley after Stanford University. As a businessman, I said, wow, there's some big dollars there. As a taxpayer, I said, I want to figure out how to get a hold of that. So we started a project to try to figure out what we can do with the Ames facility that will be more effective for the taxpayer. And the reality is that we're all locked in all these GSA systems and things. The agency doesn't really have any incentive to do the right thing. And so we got a group within the White House to start helping us with that. But there's half a year of NASA's budget is locked up in Ames. And we started on a path to try to figure out how to unlock that. Then the audit, the oversight, the OMB, the GAO, the Government Performance Results Modernization Act, all this stuff is crazily expensive. I don't know how to get rid of it, but I think one of the key answers is you got to make NASA a special services agency. So NASA still functions like the IRS or like the Consumer Finance Protection Board or like any other government agency. They have to follow all the rules in terms of hiring. And if you talk to the AHR people, it drives them nuts. They go on campus, they're trying to hire top people, and SpaceX has a booth, and Orbital 80K has a booth, Sierra Nevada has a booth, and they meet a good student who they think will be perfect. All those other places are taking people out for dinner that night and giving them offers, where NASA's saying, well, if we start the process now, in 7 months we can give you an offer. This has got to change. And there's so many other things about NASA being a mission-oriented organization that it should have the status that the FBI, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and other special services agencies have. There's just so many things that NASA could do, including private-public partnerships, in much more efficient ways if it was a special services agency. So those were some of the big high points of the unbounded ideas. So we went and presented it to the White House. You can't quite see this, and I did that deliberately, but this is a picture of my whiteboard in my office at NASA, which outlined that presentation. And so I want to answer the question, where are the unbounded ideas today? Well, government's gone on. They've all been bounded, constrained, stifled. No, actually, that's not true. Steve Jerzik told me yesterday that many of them went into this order. So it was actually kind of interesting. So March 13th, 2017 was actually the day that 10 of us from NASA went over to the White House to present these ideas. And we had people from OMB and Michael Kratsios from Office of Technology and Science Policy, domestic policy advisors, Darius Brooks from Vice President Pence's office, who's his policy guy, and several other important people around the table. And what the presentation said was, look, we have some big ideas for NASA that we think the administration can use to really rally a broad sector of the public behind them. And we have a way to help fund that because we have a lot of ideas that are going to make NASA more efficient. And so the guy got to the end of the presentation, he said, look, we got some bad news and some good news. Oh, and by the way, and I was advocating that when you announce the Space Council, why don't you also announce a couple of huge space policies at the same time you announce the Space Council, and you get the senators and the congressmen and the administration people, the Space Council up there, and you kind of put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we're going to do. They didn't quite go for that idea. They said, look, I think we should form the council, let them have the ideas, let them make the policy, and then we'll go for it. But I kind of liked the whole vision of that. I'm a theater guy. I do come from New York City, see a lot of Broadway shows. But the good news is, the guy said, the bad news is we're not doing any kind of big policy announcement. We're going to wait till the Space Council. The good news is, I don't know if you guys know, but in an hour, we're going to release an executive order requiring every agency to do exactly what you guys have already done. So you guys have pretty much already done the work, and we haven't even issued the order yet. So that was a nice thing. That was kind of my, I would have been concerned if all these ideas had gone to waste. So what you're waiting for, is he actually going to say anything about that's important to this conference and important about capital raising? Bill Gertzenmeyer said a lot of these things already, but I just want to underscore them again. So NASA needs mission commitment and multi-year appropriations. I think the Space Council has a critical role to play. As long as we define our major objectives, national security, commercial opportunities, and this human level multiplier, And that's something that they talk a lot about NASA. It's hard to explain. But something improves in all of our humanity when we accomplish things in space. And I'm going to kind of end with that. But all this is what's key to reducing the cost of private capital. Private dollars can organize around known plans. They can't organize around changes in plans. And by the way, this is a very important means to involve our allies. When we don't have a policy, we don't have a plan, we literally have our allies coming to us talking about lunar missions, saying, look, the Chinese are planning some lunar missions, and we want to do that, and we'd rather go with you than them, but you don't have a plan. So it's absolutely imperative that we start getting some long-term plans. And one thing I learned is, there's the old golden rule, the way it was taught to us, do unto others. There's the kind of cynical Wall Street version of the golden rule, which is he who has the gold makes the rules. And what I learned at NASA is the NASA version, he who has the gear makes the rules. So if we want to make the rules about how space is going to be colonized, we got to get the right gear, and we got to get out in front, and we got to stay out in front. We need consistent policy for that. So NASA needs to continue to evolve to reflect the context of market funding available to the space industry today. Bill Gerstenmaier did a great job of talking about all these things. You've already got Sand Hill Road in the game. That's because they see this as a big data play. There's tons of data that you can collect from space. We're going to have an ongoing shift to competition market solutions and away from cost-plus contracts. That just makes sense. And again, more certainty is going to allow private capital to bid and to live with those bids. And this is something that's critical to getting more competition in. And I think NASA should stay focused on what's impossible today and let the market deal with the easy things. And nobody's smarter than Jeff Bezos. He kind of brought this home in talking about this. He said, look, I'm really good at delivering things. And I know I can build something. By the way, our friend from the Fed in Dallas said billionaires are the key. Jeff Bezos said, my business plan is every year I'm going to sell $1 billion of Amazon stock, and I'm going to put it into Blue Origin. So that's some serious capital coming into the industry. But he said, look, I know I can get something up. I know I can deliver. But here on Earth, I've got GPS, and I got a highway system. What I need from NASA is, how do you navigate in space? You've got software programs that tell people how to navigate in places where there's no GPS. That's what I need from you. I can make the propulsion, I can do the aerodynamics, I can do all that, but there's many things that NASA has that I need. So if we can partner together in a way that you can provide what I don't have, then I can provide the rest. I thought that was a very good example. And talk about a guy that gives a great 10-minute TED Talk. He's about the best there is. So what about NASA and the haymaker ratio? So this is something, as you can see by my name of my firm, Advection, I like naming things. So we were trying to put our finger on this point that everybody loves NASA. And if you do public polling and things, when NASA accomplishes something, there's a massive public outpouring. And so as a political advisor, and part of the political team, I really wanted the White House to be latched onto this, that if you want to get popularity, if you want to get support behind your programs, start doing some things that are successful in space. And the two things happened when I was there in that short 56 days. SpaceX landed that first stage of Falcon 9 back on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral. That was an incredibly inspiring moment to see something as unaerodynamic as a tube of metal coming and landing right in that perfect spot. And the other thing that happened was that TRAPPIST-1 system was discovered. And Jen-Ray Wang, who I mentioned earlier, our communications person, was watching all the social media hits as that went out. And it was amazing, kind of went out early in the morning in the US, and we had hundreds of millions of hits. And then Europe got it before the end of their day, and we were up to high hundreds of millions. And then Asia woke up, and it soared up into the 2.5 billion hits on social media. People looking at that picture, reading about the fact that we had discovered a solar system that had characteristics that could support human life. So this is a very important thing of connecting our humanity, knowing who we are, and doing something good for Earth. So I just want to kind of leave with that that's why we got to keep investing in this, and that's why it's going to make sense for our country in the long term. I used all my time.
You did.
See, but
yes,
but
we're not going to let you get off the stage
Okay.
without at least one question.
Okay.
And the number one question I think the audience would like to ask you as an investment person, what areas of space investment do you find are the most interesting right now?
Okay, so I think the enabling technologies are the most interesting. Low Earth orbit, that's going to continue the data play, more ways to collect data, very interesting. But when you talk about that next level that Bill Gerstenmaier talked about, getting out to cislunar, the enabling technologies that assist with that, and enabling technologies to support the low Earth orbit are the most interesting to me. So, for example, Axiom, the space station company, if the International Space Station is capacity constrained or is going to be somehow handed over, wouldn't it be great to have more space stations? The HAB companies are very interesting. And then you need more transportation. We've got a lot of big names in transportation, but as Bigelow says, we don't have the taxi yet. We've got the big, semi trucks going up that SpaceX and Orbital ATK and Blue Origin are going to be sending up, and then we've got the little satellites going up, but we don't have people sending the Uber SUVs up and back in space. That would be a key enabling technology.
Super. Thank you so much, Greg. We appreciate your talk here today.